All right. Welcome back to the Lead Counsel Podcast. Your host, I'm Tona. I'm here with Juliet. Jules, what's going on?
Hello. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody.
So today's guest is my friend, Jeff Cunningham. And Jeff is an ethics attorney. He's my ethics attorney. So I thought it'd be a great idea to get him on because a lot of the lawyers that listen to this, it might be kind of a new and novel idea. And Jeff is doing something really interesting. I found Jeff on LinkedIn. He runs a group on LinkedIn, which we'll talk about shortly. He's got a membership plan that you become part of. And it's all really, really interesting what he's doing. And he's really kind of doing cutting edge marketing stuff, but he's also providing really valuable services. So I kind of want to jump right into it. Jeff, what's going on, my man? How you doing?
Not much. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited. I'm a big fan of your podcast and really cool to be part of it.
I appreciate you coming on. So I kind of started on a retainer ethics attorney model. God, it's got to be 7 or 8 years ago, right? Maybe more, maybe 10.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always the kind of thing where I didn't realize how much I would use it till I had it in place. And I was like, oh, there's so many questions that come up in any given day. And yeah, I could have associates doing legal research on it, but the service that you provide, I find it super cost effective. It's really great for small to mid-sized law firms. So let's start with how you got into risk management for law firms specifically and claims against lawyers, that type of stuff.
Yeah. So, coming out of law school, I wanted to do criminal defense work and I just couldn't get a job. So I got a job at Wilson-Elster and I went to a military college. So they sent me to Tom Highland, who was a Vietnam vet, because they thought we'd get along. And we did. He was general counsel for Wilson-Elster and he defended lawyers sued for malpractice and handled ethics work. So that's what I did. And it just stuck. And from there, it's grown into sort of less reactive, waiting for the grievance to come in or the legal mal case to come in, and more proactive, trying to offer the general counsel services to smaller, mid-sized firms to really get ahead of the risk, because look, there's always a random piece of risk, but there are large sections of risk that all law firms face, regardless of size, regardless of geographic location, regardless of practice area. There's common trends that you can get a lot of return on investment on. And then, the membership, the sort of fractional model, I realized that so many firms that worked with me, keeping me on an hourly basis, and I still have some clients that do that, but, our phone calls were under 6 minutes. They were very, very fast because they were watching the clock. I was watching the clock. It just wasn't working. And so I still have a couple of firms that prefer that way, but that's very reactive still. They have a problem, they reach out. We try to address the problem. With the membership and with the flat fee, it really allows us to kind of dive into much, much deeper stuff. And it's been great from my side, and it's been very profitable, very enjoyable. And I think from the client side, it provides great value.
100% agree with that. For anybody listening to this, if you're just starting out on the journey of owning your own law firm or whatever it is, it's one of the pieces that I will never do without. Right? It's as important as marketing. It's as important as any other facet of my business model where I kind of look at you like a pre-insurance insurance policy, right? And that's kind of how I use you. Or if I have questions that pop up, how would you handle this? You also give me global advice, more like, well, you can do this. Here are the ethics on it. And here's really the business ramifications of it. So I always really appreciate that kind of approach when people are representing me. And again, it's more peace of mind, right? Knowing that I'm not going to guess that there's a person who's an expert in the space. So even though I don't know if we're allowed to call you an expert, right? So that's a little lawyer's joke, Jules. You're not supposed to use the word expert when you're describing it. It's from like the 1800s probably.
Just my focus.
I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Tom says that a lot, especially like when it comes to social media. If we see other attorneys calling themselves experts, he's like, oh.
Yeah, expert and the best, yeah.
And I got to tell you that one of the more frustrating things in my life is, I love dealing with you, Jeff, but it's so frustrating, right? Like I go out to you with a question and you're like, can't say this, you can't do. And it's not you, it's what the rules are.
Right.
And I just wish that, they talk about mental health a lot on LinkedIn, right? Mental health for lawyers. Yep. And yet it's not just the schools that don't do anything for the practice of law, but the governing bodies, like get caught up to the century we're in with the realities of doing business in a small firm, medium firm, trying to compete with the big firms. And then, listen, I'm going to go off script already. You said something to me. I asked you a question that upset me so much, Jeffrey Cunningham, and I'm going to tell you what that was. The different rules for big law versus small law.
Yep.
So do me a favor without me making you uncomfortable, but I might make you uncomfortable. What are the distinctions that you see just in claims? Because you always post about the statistics of small law firms are more likely to be sued. So give me some of the statistics that you talk about on your LinkedIn stuff. And what do you think is the reason behind that?
Yeah, so 72% of all legal malclaims are against small law firms of 10 lawyers or less. That's incredible. About a third of all claims are against solo practitioners. And there's a host of reasons for that. If you look at the practice area breakdown, plaintiff's personal injury is by far the riskiest. Then you have family law. It's by far, almost by double the riskiest practice area. Yeah, about 20%-ish.
Wow.
Family law, which I think that sort of makes sense. Trust and estates tend to have the real high value. Not only is it risky, but it's exceptionally high value. And, those three areas of law combined almost make up half of all claims. Those are sort of small law practice. There are some big shops, there's some national shops that kind of do that stuff, but typically that's small law work too. Big law firms, and that's big with a capital B, capital L, or a lowercase b, lowercase l,
right.
1,000 lawyer shop or the white shoe lawyer shop. They have general counsel, they have ethics counsel, they have librarians, they have all the resources in the world to build redundancies and protect their firm by protecting their people. And smaller firms just don't have that capability. It's not economically, it's not business feasible. So, I think those are the big issues. The other reality is that and this is where, the comfort level comes in a little bit. But if you look at the bar associations, bar associations are heavily, I don't want to say biased, but heavily influenced by big law. And again, it's big law either by firms in size or by am law ranking. Again, those lawyers have the time, the resources to be heavily involved in their bar associations. And you kind of reap what you sow, right? They're investing the time. So of course they're going to be more influential. But that, I think, tends to make the bar and the ethics opinions tend to be oriented. I don't want to say skewed against the small guys, but they're oriented more towards big law practice. And it's just kind of the reality. On top of that, and not to get too bogged down in the stats, but 55%-ish of all legal mal and ethics claims involve attorney wellness. So either mental health or substance abuse. And our substance abuse and mental health stats are abysmal, absolutely abysmal. And again, I think big law firms are able to support their people with programs. My firm, we have about 300 lawyers. We have incredible wellness programs that you just can't do if you're a 4-person law firm. Right. You just can't afford to do that. And so I think that goes hand in hand. Also, if you're a small shop, the reality is you might not be able to notice, right, that something's amiss. Whereas if there's, dozens or hundreds of people involved or a robust HR department, they might notice that something's going on where a smaller shop wouldn't. So I think the mental health side is really, really important too, and has to do with the size of the organization.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating because it presents a huge gap too, because if I've read somewhere like the statistics of like 50% of lawyers will end up in solo practice or a small practice at some point. But it also, if you think about it, I think anyway, because I hear about access to justice all the time, right? Mm-hmm. They wanted to make a change to the court rules a while ago, and the lawyers were like, look, access to justice is a big issue. Well, big law firms aren't taking a $2,500 case, right? They'll do pro bono. I know there's like mandatory, like a structured pro bono program, but sole practitioners do provide access to justice because they can do it at a price point that big law just wouldn't do it at. It's not going to be profitable work. So it's really a frustrating thing. And I don't want this to turn into an hour of me whining about this, but it goes hand in hand because it really is frustrating, right? To be trying to build something, you're competing against big law, you're competing against the do-it-yourself websites now, like LegalZoom or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But on top of that, to have all of these constrictures and the rules that they have are really just not able to move as fast as the marketplace anymore.
Yeah, and it's just the reality. A perfect example is Judiciary Law 470. I don't know how you feel about 470, but it requires...
I don't know what that is, so tell me what it is. So, I probably do know what it is, but
you probably do once I mention it.
Right.
So out-of-state attorneys who are admitted in New York have to have a brick and mortar office in New York State. It is, I mean, given the reality of remote practice, remote work, COVID, I'm sitting in Stamford, Connecticut. I always get people ask me, I have a P.O. box in New York. Is that enough? And this law predates the existence of P.O. boxes. That's how old it is.
Wow.
And
so why don't they
around.
Just change it?
Right.
Why don't they just change it?
It's been repealed, attempted to be repealed so many times. It died in the judiciary in 2022. And then the governor just failed to sign it in 2023. So there's momentum again to try to repeal it again to get rid of this requirement because it requires an out-of-state lawyer to rent some kind of like front, I mean, it has to be more than a mail drop.
But what that tells me is that somebody with the money is trying to use the rules to create a barrier to entry.
Yep.
And it's so frustrating because now it's on the politician's desk or it's with the committees. But really, what's in the best interest of the marketplace? It's the only field where these rules are almost weaponized in so many different ways. And as long as you got the money to play ball, you got the money to play ball. It's just frustrating. It's super frustrating. But I also think it highlights why somebody like you is so important because we've talked about a satellite office setups, right? And what the requirements are. And then Jules runs around all over Long Island or all over New York trying to meet those requirements.
I knew your name sounded familiar. I feel like every time Tom and I think of like a marketing initiative, it's always got to ask Jeff first before we do anything.
Yeah, always. Because you know what? I don't want to throw money, time, and resources into something only to hear, yeah, man, there's this other rule. Right. So you take a more holistic approach to risk management, which I really love. And one of the things that you emphasize is simple systems. And I know this because you helped me work through a check management system. Something simple that a lot of people listening to this may not be dealing with yet is as you grow your practice, a good thing and then a complex part of what it is, well, what do you do if you have, 200 checks come in on a Monday? Great problem to have. And then you have people that will in your office complain and then you say to them, don't you ever complain about that problem? But you then have to create a system for handling, right? You wouldn't think of this stuff, but what's beautiful about it is the ability to get you on the phone or talk through a system that we've roadmapped and said, does this comply with ethics and risk mitigation, right? Because that's a big thing. You also want to prevent theft and mistakes and check handling, that type of stuff. So from your perspective, why is it that you always strive for simplicity?
Yeah, so I learned early on that a perfect system that's too complicated, people just aren't going to use it. And so the more simple you can make, and even if you have something that's working really well, if you can simplify it even more, you're just going to get that buy-in from the team, whether the team is, your partners, whether your team is your staff, your clients, your vendors, whoever it is. The easier you can make it for the user, the much more likely they're going to use it. So a decent system or even a bad system, I think is better than a perfect system that's too complicated. And I've seen some wonderful systems on paper. They just don't get used or they get used poorly. And it's almost worse than not having a system in place at all. So I think simplicity is absolutely key.
How do you get law firms to understand why a fractional compliance officer or a fractional chief legal officer is the way to go?
It is a bit of education. My target law firm is often someone who doesn't have that big law experience and doesn't really know what a GC does for a law firm. They know what a GC does for a business, but the law firm GC, the law firm chief legal officer, is just a very different role than a traditional GC for a business. It sort of covers what a business GC does. But, the managing partner, the owner can do that too from the legal side, right? Substantively, they know the law related to their practice area way better than I ever will. So it's a lot of education about the risk. I think most small law firms don't appreciate how risky their practice is.
Yeah.
And I think there's some psychology to that. Like, you can't look at the cliff, you can't look into the abyss. But the statistics are insane. The ABA says we have lawyers in private practice in America have an 80% chance of being sued for legal malpractice over the course of their career. I feel like that number's high, but I think it's closer to the truth than what most people ask. When I ask people, they think 10 to 15% is usually the number they throw out there. And it's incredible. The only profession I think that's in worse shape than ours is doctors. Doctors are like guaranteed to be sued. So it really is wild. And as the economy turns up or down, I find claims increase. Like no matter what happens, somehow the lawyers get sued more. It's just a go-to.
Yeah.
And then on the ethics side, anyone with an internet connection can file a grievance against any lawyer they want to. They don't even have to know you.
Yeah.
I think it's unfortunate, but I get why we allow it, and it's important that we allow it, and we have to hold ourselves to that standard, but it's really unfortunate. I mean, it is that just anybody can file any baseless grievance they want.
Right. Yeah, and then you got to deal with it, right? Now, when I read the bar papers and stuff, I see that a lot of attorneys get jammed up because they just don't respond to them. Right? Yeah. Like, you're like, how do you not respond to a piece of paper coming from the state? You got to respond, you know? And you'd be crazy to respond yourself. I will never understand lawyers. I don't know. I used to wonder what was the worst business professional out there. And I have my thoughts, but I am shocked at the way lawyers will call themselves now the new title. Everybody's a CEO, right? Yeah. Tell me you're really a CEO and tell me who your fractional people are. Oh, you don't have fractional people? I don't know if you're there yet, because how are you going to run a business without general counsel, right? It's just crazy to me. And listen, I don't have to talk to you all the time. Matter of fact, I prefer not to, no offense. But what I do love is having Janira or Jules being able to fire off an email to you and saying, Jeff, I need your opinion. And then you might say, can I get a call with Tom? Yeah. Right. So that's the really valuable part of it. And it seems like, and you tell me, do you actually tailor risk management strategies to accommodate the different needs of a law practice, the practice areas, and different risk profiles with law firms?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, it's easy to make generalizations like small law is dangerous, plaintiff's personal injury is dangerous. Then there's real nuances, and it has to do with your community. It has to do with the diversity of your staff and your lawyers. And there's also interesting nuances. I have a client law firm that's a husband and wife partnership, and it's got really interesting challenges that I think a traditional law firm just doesn't deal with. And so, understanding the partners, there's generally some lawyers that are extremely risk averse, some that aren't, some that are very business savvy, some that aren't. And I think that's just sort of the nature of the beast. So sort of figuring out who is kind of the rainmaker, who's kind of the business guy, who's kind of the workhorse, that's really key too. I use a survey. I don't think we've ever done the survey together, but I use a survey to sort of get a risk profile. I put out a report card, areas where we can kind of have the best ROI on, again, simple systems that can sort of fix big issues like conflicts is an issue that so many small law firms wait until it's a disaster to try to address. And it's so easy to start earlier to build a healthy conflict system. Hiring and lateral attorneys are a huge source of risk. About a third of law firms that face a legal malclaim, it stems from a lateral hire. So they bring in a lawyer who either brings a case with them that turns into a disaster, or the more common thing is that they overpromise. Either they overpromise their book of business or they overpromise their skill set. Because sometimes when you're trying to get a job, you say, oh, of course I handle ERISA claims. I do ERISA claims all the time. And then, you walk in the door and you're like, all right, I know what ERISA is, but I've never actually handled one. So that's another area where I think adding friction, slowing the process down can really reap huge rewards for firms.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I really value is that you put that friction in place, especially like a lot of law firm owners are like me, like we just quick start, run, make all the decisions you want to make in a given day. And I always put this out on social media. I say, look, I'm an intuitive, impulsive decision maker. What I should probably elaborate on is I surround myself with people like you that add the friction. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I'm comfortable making 100 decisions in a day. What I am also comfortable with is I'm also running it by you and a set of coaches or fractional C-suite people. That's their job, is to take what I want to do and make it something that is safer, more secure, and definitely has those risk mitigation strategies built in.
100%. I think the fractional C-suite, I think, is key because it lets the law firm owners do whatever it is that they do best, right? I mean, maybe you're great at running a law firm and you're a great lawyer and you're great at client development and you're a great CFO. Putting all that in one person is pretty unlikely, though. And I think lawyers tend to be not great CFOs, right? It's It's not usually what we're good at. Are there guys who are? Sure. But, getting a fractional CFO, and that can be a bookkeeper if that's what you need at the time, right? All the way up to someone who's extremely sophisticated on the financial side. That frees you up, you being law firm leadership, whoever it is, to do what you're good at. And it lets you sort of turn that side over, and it frees you up to do what you want to do too. I mean, I think so many lawyers start a law firm and then end up working for the law firm instead of having the law firm work for them. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And again, that's no way to live. And then that's tied to mental health. It's tied to physical health. So all of these things become really interwoven. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you, here's the plug I'll give you because I'm a plaintiff's guy. So at your prior firm, I've known them through the years. It's a big law firm and they always did defense work.
Mm-hmm.
And, people are quick to demonize the defense bar until you need them. It's like everything else. People demonize plaintiffs' lawyers till you need one. People demonize cops till you need one. So what I love about having you in my corner is, what's the name of the firm that you're at now? And I know you just became a partner there. What's the name of the firm?
McAngus, Goodalock, and Curry. We go by MGC Law. So
I was going to say, that's a mouthful. I'll never be able to repeat that. Where is the main hub located?
Columbia, South Carolina. So it's mostly a southern firm. We've just grew into New York last year in Garden City. And then they've opened up a bunch of New England offices. We have a Hartford office, Providence, Rhode Island, Boston, and Manchester. So we're growing in New England, and then we're going to head west. So it's pretty exciting.
And they got about 300 lawyers, you said?
Yeah, around there. I'm not, the head count's always a little blurry, so.
Yeah. It's always a moving target.
Coming and going, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So how does a law firm, in your opinion, maintain a focus on insurance coverage, defense work, and providing fractional general counsel services, your law firm specifically?
Yeah, so I guess the core of our firm is really the insurance defense, and workers' comp is really the biggest aspect of that. The coverage and the professional liability, it sort of is an outgrowth of that kind of core insurance defense work. And I think it's sort of that demonized thing, you sort of get in your defense role and it's hard to think outside the box. I think the plaintiff's bar has the same problem. I think the longer you practice, the more you appreciate the other side and sort of figure it out. The insurance component is tricky because it's really hard to take on plaintiff side work, even if it's like a breach of contract case or something, because you never want to be going against the insurance companies. It's just bad business. Even though the client is our insured and all our duties flow to the client, from a business standpoint, the insurance companies are the ones that send us the work. And it's important to integrate whether we're doing the coverage work, whether we're doing the actual defense, or whether like my GC work, the fractional work for law firms, you want to make sure you're complementing the insurance coverage rather than ever being opposed to the insurers. And luckily for me, working with lawyers, that's rather easy to do because even more than the law firm, the LPL carrier or whatever you're talking about, your D&O, your cyber, your insurance companies have an even greater interest in you being a safer, more ethical, more risk-averse entity than even the law firm owners. So it's kind of the insurance companies want to see ethics counsel. The GC role for law firms is still pretty new. It wasn't until the late 90s that the big firms started developing general counsel's office. And there's not many people who offer it for the smaller firms. I saw you were actually on Jonathan Hawkins' podcast.
Yes,
I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but he's one of the few guys who offers a similar service. And so I think it's growing. I think more people are going to do it. And I think the insurance companies, I hope the insurance companies sort of get behind it even more and really embrace it because it's a bit more than ethics.
I'm not, so I know his wheelhouse, more like the transactional merger acquisition stuff. And he's working on something for me right now on the transactional side, on several transactional things. But you're going to be the guy that's reviewing it from an ethics standpoint, right? Because you're the New York ethics specialist. And I told him, I go, look, I have Jeff on retainer and Jeff is my guy, but I didn't know where the overlap was. I'm sure there's a little bit, but I think he considers himself more of the law firm transactional side,
definitely.
Right? If somebody's going to make somebody a partner or succession planning, right? Actually, we'll end up complementing each other really well.
He sent people my way, I send people his way. I mean, it's really a nice relationship. And he's a great guy, which helps. I mean,
he's fantastic. He really is.
It is interesting because at the end of the day, if you have a heavy ethics issue, I probably will help you find Bruce Green, the professor at Fordham, I think is the guy. And if you're talking about an ethics issue that's make or break, bet the company, bet your license, I'm probably not. I'm not Bruce Green. I'm not. And so, I think we're going to bring him in. So it is interesting that, even when you drill down and find someone who focuses so precisely, there still could be, depending on the issue, there could be somebody else who's better for it. And I think that's what a GC does as well, is just like a GC for a business or a chief legal officer for a business, they're not going to handle everything. They're going to make sure that the right people are handling the right issues. And I think that's really key.
I have a question. So obviously AI has become a huge thing in any professional space and people are trying to utilize it any way they can. Have you seen a lot of ethical issues come up recently based off of lawyers' AI use?
Yes. We're actually seeing more of the courts dealing with it right now. Usually it's the other way. Usually lawyers get in trouble on the ethics side and the bar associations and the grievance committees start dealing with it. And then it turns into lawsuits. Here, lawyers are actually screwing up in court in a really embarrassing scale. But Florida just put out a formal ethics opinion about the use of AI, and they highlighted confidentiality, communications, competence. They highlighted sort of the key areas. New Jersey and California have advisory opinions. I think the Florida model, I think that's going to kind of be what everybody takes on. Rhode Island, I checked this morning, it's still not out, but Rhode Island's supposed to have one coming out soon. That's been for like a month, so we'll see. But the additional thing Jersey and California add in is the bias. And it's kind of wild to see how the AI can be biased. I mean, it's built by humans, and we see with Gemini, like it was built by humans with bias in mind. It just kind of got away from them. But there's also the unconscious bias that we all have that is built and baked into it. And it learns off of like all of human information. So all of the biases that are out there, it sort of learns from. And for states that have Rule 8.4G, which doesn't let us discriminate or harass based on certain protected classes like race, religion, the core protected classes, it can be really problematic if you're using AI and it has a bias that you don't really catch. And then, that translates into your work product. The other area I think is going to be really interesting with AI is 1.5 and fees. Something that used to take 30 hours to do, if it takes an hour to do, I think lawyers are going to be tempted to charge that 30 hours. And if they're still charging by the hour, that's going to be a huge problem. Now, I'm a big fan of flat fees and alternative fees. And I'm hoping what they're going to do is take the AI and say, all right, I can do this a lot faster. So instead of charging 30 times whatever my rate was, I'm going to charge half of that, because I'm providing this service to the client. I'm accepting the risk from the client, but I'm able to do it much more efficiently using AI. So, but I think that's going to be a big problem. And the last thing, I could talk about AI and risk forever, is the communications and 1.4. A lot of firms are playing around with chatbots, especially for intake, which I think is great. I'm a big fan of slowing down intake for lawyers in general. I think we all want the clients and we all want to bring the clients in immediately. And it's sort of, I do it myself. It's sort of counterintuitive to be like, wait a second, are we really the right fit? And it's hard to trust your gut. It is. But the chatbots, I think that's going to be even bigger by next year, where AI is sending emails, where AI is really communicating with the client directly. And I think that's going to be a huge benefit. As long as you have client buy-in and as long as you have the systems to make sure everything it's doing is appropriate, I think it's going to be great because it's going to make client communication real time. I mean, it is. Right. But there's going to be growing pains, like the court cases we're seeing where, lawyers are just using AI without knowing what they're doing and they're getting in trouble. We're going to see that happen more and more. And unfortunately, the profession isn't known for embracing cutting edge technology. We're just not. We're behind the curve. I think it's going to be client driven. I think clients are going to insist on AI because it's making us so much more efficient and so much faster.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
Interesting.
Jules,
thank you.
Send me a reminder to send Jeff my AI policy. I think I actually sent it to you when you doing a survey on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I've been fishing for them. Yep. And for anybody listening, if they want my template, they can reach out. I'm happy to share it. It's
I would love it.
I'll
Maybe
send
it's
it your
based
way.
off of mine. I don't know because I know I sent you one because when it came out, like I'm an early adopter of technology, but I'm also cautious as hell when it comes to the unknown, right? So yeah, I paid for ChatGPT. I think it's fantastic. Anytime I have an impulse to use it, I have to make sure I'm not uploading anything that's confidentiality protected or any of that stuff because we don't know where any of this stuff is going right now.
Right.
So yes, it's really interesting. Let's talk about first, because this is always a hot button topic. I was talking to an attorney over lunch and they're like, oh, I don't have malpractice insurance. So you've mentioned cyber risk. There's also employment risk now. You got to have EPLI insurance if you have a firm that's got more than, 5 people in it, I would say, as well as the rising cost of professional liability insurance. How do you think law firms should be adapting to these ever increasing, ever evolving, and more costly threats that are out there?
It's getting to the point, I think, especially on the cyber insurance side, where it's just like it's cost prohibitive to protect yourself in a meaningful way. I think the biggest thing law firms should do, and I know you're a fan of this, is raise your rates. I think lawyers I don't know why, we sort of think of ourselves as something different than business people. And it's so preposterous. I had an electrician come to my house and he's here to make money, right? He's providing me a service I can't do myself. He's a real nice guy, but he's here to make money. So he's charging me whatever he thinks he can get out of me, and I used to mow lawns when I was a kid. And my boss, we would mow lawns and he would charge X for a lawn. But Like one guy was the doctor. We would do the doctor's lawn, and the doctor paid 3x.
I was just going to say,
Right,
drive up to his house, like 5x.
Right. Because he knew he could get a little more out of the doctor. And I'm sure the doctor didn't care. I'm sure my lawn guy charges me a little more than he charges everybody else. It's, whatever. That's business. Lawyers are not good at it. And in fact, I find most of my clients have a rate that should be raised, but they actually offer like a reduced rate. Again, to try to bring in the business. They feel bad or awkward about it. But, I think raising rates and raising retainer fees is really the absolute key. And if you get to a point where you're like, I really can't afford the insurance I should carry, you go to an insurance broker or you go to insurance counsel and they give you a suite of insurance that you should get. And you think, wow, I can't afford that. Then something's wrong with your business model, not the insurance, right? It's not your risk. That's the problem. You're not charging enough money. You're not making enough money to pay for your insurance. That's an issue. Just like if you couldn't afford your homeowner's insurance, well, maybe you have a house that you can't afford. It's not necessary. I mean, look, insurance is expensive. It's not getting any cheaper.
But that's a great comparison you just brought up. Like, if you have a firm that you're operating, and that's your house, right? So you wouldn't have a house without homeowners insurance. I don't understand it. And I'm telling you, it's a lot of solo practitioners where they're like, I didn't think I needed it. I'm like, dude, with an 80% sue rate, are you kidding me? Like, of course you need it. Of course.
It's just absolutely crazy. And I don't get it. I just don't understand it. And it's not that expensive, especially if you're a solo. Like, there's a cost to it, but it's just not that expensive. And if nothing else, it gets you defense. So when you get sued, they're paying the lawyer. I know. Like, it really is strange. And it's strange that it's not required. In some states, it's required to notify the client if you're not insured.
Right.
And I think that, nobody wants to do that, right? So I think that causes lawyers to then get insurance. But in New York, it's not the case.
It's funny. Talk about another difference, too. So a buddy of mine is in North Carolina. He's in Charlotte. His bar association has a ethics hotline, but it's actually a legit ethics hotline. It's basically what you do, but it's tied to the bar association. So he'll fire off a letter the same way I do to you, but he doesn't get charged because he's paying dues. So before I found you, I was like, look, I got to make sure I got answers to questions I have. And I belong to the Suffolk County Bar Association, and they have an ethics hotline that you fire off a question to. And I don't know, it was like 4 years ago, and I still don't have an answer to my question. Lo and behold, I've paid you. I've gotten the answer to my question. Shift with me for a second, because another frustration, I feel like this is the show of the frustrated Tom coming out. So I get to vent everything to you, and you're not charging me for it. But it's weird, right? So they have these sanctioned CLEs. And I use a digital online provider for my CLE program. But I have all these coaches that I spend 4 hours a month with, that I spend countless thousands of dollars on. None of that qualifies for CLEs.
Right. So in Connecticut, it would. Connecticut's pretty open about what you want to use. In New York, nope, it's got to be New York qualified. And with your membership, you do get 12 credits a year from me if you want to. Oh,
I do?
I'll make sure you're tapped into that.
Oh, so hell yeah, man.
You got to listen to 12 hours of me. So
I will listen. I'd rather listen to 12 hours of you, because I know you're tapped into the issues for me that I want to know about, right? And every time I attend stuff like that, what's interesting is I come back because I know every system, every document, everything in my office I know because I built it, where I say, oh, Janira, do me a favor, get this system over to Jeff. We haven't touched this in 10 years. It probably needs to be revised or something like that. So yes, talk about the monthly program that you do, what it's called, where people can find it. Talk about that stuff.
So it's called the On-Call General Counsel membership. Right now it's $600 a month starting for 10 lawyers or less. I have some firms that are bigger, and it's really customizable. Sometimes I work with a managing partner, sometimes the owners, sometimes the general counsel. If the firm has a GC, I work as kind of the deputy GC, and it's just unlimited communication. So you pick up the phone, you send me an email, and we work through whatever the issue is. If I put pen to paper and, have to generate work product, or if something just needs research or something like that, then it's hourly. And there's a 15% discount off of our hourly rate. And then there's the standing monthly membership meeting for firms that want it. And the leadership is kind of whoever they define as the firm leadership. And one of the interesting things to do with law firm clients is figure out who their leaders are. A lot of times there'll be a solo owner or two guys who own a firm. And, after talking for a little while, you find out there really is probably a third and fourth person who are the firm leaders. They're usually not lawyers. It's usually, staff that's been there from the beginning, and they're indispensable. And it's like, well, get them in the call. Why am I talking to you? You have to go talk to them, right? And then there's the monthly CLE, and they're always ethics. And then we cover the New York bases, cyber, diversity, ethics. So it's 12 credits.
Nice. Nice.
One a
Nice.
month. Yep. So we get everything out of the way. And, and it's always an ethics and risk management spin. So it's cyber and ethics risk management. It's diversity, ethics, and risk management. That way, if you're doing it for the credit or not, you're still kind of talking and thinking about risk management for your firm.
Yeah, and I think a lot of lawyers are they're hesitant to charge what they got to charge, and they're hesitant to think of themselves as business owners. And I think that you are part of that mindset, right? Where it's like, look, how do you own a business that you don't think about preserving? About the concept of risk mitigation. And it's funny because when you first start a law firm, you're like, I want to make money. I want to make a lot of money. And then when you get into like years 8 to 23, you're like, first, lose no money. Second, make money, right? So like, you got to think like a business owner, and every business owner out there, the same attorneys that will give advice of do succession planning, don't do succession planning.
Right.
And then there's the same lawyers that are like, you got to run your small little business like a business, right? Jules, you want to open up a social media house, you got to run it like a business. You got to pay for legal fees. They don't want to pay for legal fees. So what do? They don't pay for malpractice insurance. They don't pay for legal fees to a guy like Jeff. Why? Right? Like, treat it like a business. Treat it like a business. You guys,
I actually have another question. I know that you're active on social media as well, Jeff. So I wanted to ask, what is the biggest ethical mistake you see with lawyers on social media?
So
this is going to be good.
Yeah, I know. I was waiting to ask this.
There's a lot of issues. I think probably the biggest problem is not accepting that basically everything we do on social media is advertising.
Okay.
If you're doing anything professionally on social media, you're advertising. If you're not doing it professionally, then it's hard to say. If you have Esquire in your name, if you have it connected to your law firm in any way, it's hard to say, no, that was just Jeff Cunningham talking, because unfortunately, lawyers aren't quite the same way. I mean, our freedom of speech is quite restricted, especially in states like New York that have Rule 8.4. Like, if you're talking about politics or something, or if you're talking about current events or really anything on social media, you have to keep in mind that the rules apply to what you're saying. And whether it's advertising or not, it can be very, very risky. And we owe duties to third parties. We owe duties to the public at large. And I think another really big area that's problematic is we can't critique judges in the same way a normal person can. A regular old person can just say whatever they want about a judge. A lawyer cannot do that. And lawyers get themselves in trouble a lot by posting things about judges that they probably shouldn't even say, let alone publish. Right.
Yeah, I cringe. And it's funny because Jules knows I'll come in and be like, I found another rabbit hole, man. I'll go on Reddit.
Like Reddit, I was just going to say.
Reddit, right? So,
Fishbowl, we were just talking about.
Fishbowl. Fishbowl is another one where you said, I love the anonymity. And I'm like, I would never write anything that required anonymity. Now, I like that it's anonymous, but I read some of the stuff that defense attorneys that are doing billable hour stuff will write. Oh, I bill for time on the toilet.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because these ever increasing billable hours, if you think about the billable hour and the concept of it, and I don't do any billable hour work anymore. At one point, we were doing a little bit on the breach of contract litigation side. And it's horrific, that ancient setup of the billable hour every 6-minute increment.
Yeah.
And then everything you thought bad about it, you see in an anonymous fishbowl where a guy was saying, or a guy or a girl was saying, oh, you don't bill when you're on the toilet?
Yeah.
Because they got to meet some unrealistic minimum hour billables that they have over their head.
Yeah.
And then there's the other ones who talk like, oh, I bill 3 clients at a time. And I'm like, oh, man, somebody's going to subpoena something. And there's a whole bunch of people going to get drag-netted down on these comments.
Yeah. So when I say I love the anonymity, I love that people feel comfortable with it.
Right. It leads to a lot of business for you.
If you have more than 50 employees for your company on Fishbowl, it creates a Fishbowl for your company. My current firm has one and it's active, but nobody's really said anything yet. My prior firm, people really used it. And I think it was, luckily, it was very positive, right? I think people were still concerned, right? And also, if you post enough information, AI can sniff out who you are by what you say and what you don't say. It can or an investigator can. So I think people were still a little cautious. In college, I went to a military school. We had an honor code, and we had a saying that don't do anything you wouldn't want your mom to read about in the newspaper tomorrow. And obviously that dates me a bit. Like, my mom doesn't read newspapers anymore.
Right.
But that idea, I think, is so important that, like, don't post anything on Fishbowl you wouldn't post on LinkedIn. You can share your opinion. You can share your opinion anonymously. I think it's shockingly positive. Reddit too. It's really helpful. People are really quite helpful.
Yes. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, some people are not. And, it's only anonymous seeming, right? At the end of the day, if you post it from your account, it's easily traceable.
And I will tell you that Fishbowl, I'm like, man, these people are one more comment away from disbarment. Like, listen, again, Fishbowl is relatively new, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that when the regulators catch up with that technology, they're going to be like, hey, we can't have lawyers out there doing this shit. We got to have access to these records, and I don't know how to get it. Maybe there's a lawsuit, maybe there's subpoenas or whatever, but straight downright unethical behavior out there for the world to see. And now then you see why people hate lawyers, right? You go, oh my God, you're billing on the toilet. I'm praying that somebody says that was a joke, but
I mean, that's the same thing. Although I will say I have definitely... I have definitely worked in law firms where a guy would come out of the bathroom with his, files that he brought into the bathroom with him. And so,
come on, man.
I've seen it from more than one attorney. So
that's just crazy, man. That's just crazy. I'd be really mad if I got a bill and I knew that work was being done on the toilet. I just would, man. I'd be mad.
I wasn't so happy when one time it was a guy I work with, and I was like, well, now I don't want to touch any paper.
Right. It's the same guy that's like, hey, let me shake your hand. You want some bite in my sandwich? Would you like a bite of my sandwich?
But, I think the billable hour, it evolved from a time when there wasn't a better way. And it's so ingrained, not just in the defense bar, but in so many firms. It's just so much the norm that it's sort of hard to conceive of shifting gears, and I think it's going to be small law firms that actually force big law to do it, because even big clients are going to say, wait a minute, I'm paying you an unknown amount. All I know about the amount is it's going to be really, really expensive.
Right.
But you can't even give me a ballpark, whereas this guy's telling me he can do it for $50,000.
Yes.
And I think that's going to force bigger firms to embrace alternative billing.
I do too, because when I was doing that other litigation, I was a big fan of alternative billing. So whether it's flat fee or flat fee in stages, which I adopted from defense firms that were doing it, where they would say, look, anything through this stage of litigation is this much. Anything through this stage is this much. And you're doing a really solid approximation of the amount of work. But yeah, man, you know what goes into it. AI in the mass tort space. I was having a conversation with a guy who's an AI futurist at a software company. Guy was brilliant. I sat with him for like 3 hours one night over dinner, and he was saying, listen, I'm going to put up on the screen tomorrow an image that was created by AI that shows me cut in half in a car accident.
Right.
And what's happening is the lead gen companies, there are fraudulent lead gen companies out there that are selling that lead as if it was a real case for $2,000, $2,500 to unsuspecting law firms.
Right.
And it's happening in mass torts rampantly. Yeah. So it's happening, and it's changing the landscape, and it's happening like at breakneck speed.
So there was this finance guy in Hong Kong. He got a phishing email that was to transfer like 26 million or something like that. And he contacted his boss because he's like, this looks fake. And his boss is like, no, it's real. Let's hop on a call. And so the finance team and the CFO were all on a video call with this guy, but he was the only actual human on the video call. It was deep fake video.
Oh.
He was looking at his boss in his boss's office and recognized most of the people on the call. And the CFO was like, yeah, you got to transfer the money. The guy transfers the money. A week later, he checks up on it, and nobody knows what he's talking about. And it's incredible because, imagine if one of the three of us was an AI-generated deep fake. Right. Am I going to call you afterwards and be like, Tom, was that really you on the podcast?
Right.
Or was I talking to, Tom AI? I mean, it's craziness. And it's only going to get worse. They're so powerful. They're amazing tools. But, just like email, it's an incredible tool, but it's used by scammers every day.
Yeah. And it's funny because I keep telling Jules on my to-do list, I got to look at a product called Synthesia. And I think Synthesia, what they do is you can automate processes, systems, and training using an AI. You just type the script in.
Wow.
You just literally, like, we can upload, we have a digital employee team member portal. People sign in, and every policy, every system, everything in the law firm is housed in this portal.
Wow.
So my main thing is I want to get videos made because I know that no one likes to read and no one likes to use the resources that we do. Jules, I'm sure you read the entire portal, but
I go in there all the time.
Oh, I know you do. For you, it's usually vacation policy stuff. I know. I'm just kidding, Jules. So it's exciting. But what's funny, again, is the lawyers that you and I see on LinkedIn, and they're like, yeah, AI is not a thing. And it's never going to displace us. I'm like, dude, it's already displacing you. You just don't know it yet.
It's that mindset that's going to get them stuck behind everybody else.
Yeah. And I don't think a robot lawyer is going to take over, but like a lawyer using AI is going to. Guaranteed.
100%. 100%. Like, we use it regularly, not in litigation, right? Like, I've told my litigation teams, listen, anything you put in those papers, you're signing on and you could lose your license because of. So you better damn well know those are real cases and that they're good law.
But check out CoCounsel and Lexis Plus. They both connect to Westlaw and Lexis. And there's a couple other products out there too, but even that's getting better and better. CoCounsel I've demoed. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's better than a first-year associate, I think. The work it puts out.
But that's going to replace jobs. It is. It's going to replace jobs.
I think it's going to free up first years to do other things. I do.
Right.
But yeah, it's certainly going to change jobs. I think paralegals, too, I think are going to see a big shift. I mean, a lot of paralegal work is summarizing depositions, medical records. If the AI can do that in under a minute, I asked GTP4 to rewrite the entire ABA model rules of professional conduct and insert AI use into every single rule. It did it in under a minute, in under 60 seconds. It rewrote the entire thing. Now, some of them were great, and I was like, wow, that's rule 1.1, 1.6, like the ones that I've been talking about. Some of them didn't make any sense at all. Like, some of them were far afield because it answers you. Whatever you ask it to do, it does it. It doesn't necessarily,
Right.
But the fact that it did it in under a minute is incredible. And
it's staggering.
It's got like a 40 to 50% passage rate on the bar exam. And a lot of lawyers feel good about that. Like, it can't replace us.
Not yet.
But it does the 2-day bar exam in under 6 minutes.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to think about. And it's a baby. This stuff just came out, and it's only getting smarter and stronger and better. So I think it's going to be huge.
One of the things that I keep predicting too, maybe I'm nuts for thinking this way, but why, when the courts are so backlogged and mediation companies are backlogged, you can literally probably summarize every case that's ever occurred in the U.S. since the formation of the country utilizing a ChatGPT-4, and then it becomes a neutral body.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was talking about it actually with, I want to say it was a retired judge who is a mediator now. And he's like, yeah, listen, do I think it'll ever replace, fully, because there's that human component to the case and there is an empathy component and there's just the human side of being a neutral, even though you're a neutral, right? He said, but is there potential for that kind of disruption? Of course, if you had a database that literally said, put in all your injuries, put in all the liability facts, and argue your case, and then it spit out a decision of every case and how it's come down with the dollar amount in it. They tried to do that years ago, and I'm going back really. There was an online settlement system, I forget what it was called, where you would go in blind against an adjuster and you would enter dollar amounts, right? And if it was within a certain amount, it closed the gap, it settled. I think it's since went flat and closed because a lot of people were like, look, we need the human touch to negotiation.
Right.
And it wasn't yielding what either side wanted, I think. But I don't think that's the last we've seen of that kind of service for pay. And anytime there's a profit to be made and streamlining and efficiencies, it's ripe for disruption.
Yeah, I'll get the name for you, but there's a jury predictor that, goes into your jurisdiction and looks at all the cases with your facts and can predict what a jury is going to say. And the statistics, like, its accuracy is incredible.
Oh,
there's also a guy,
get me that, yeah.
There's also a guy, Joseph Tiano. He has Legal Decoder. And I talked to him last week. It's so cool. He takes your timesheet, right? So a law firm's timesheets, which is good for firms that do hourly billing.
Right,
and from there, he can predict your legal malpractice risk. Who is going to be sued for legal malpractice? And his accuracy rates are wild.
Wow.
And, I've asked him, like, hey, will you use my timesheets? I want to see how good I am, like.
Right.
But, the AI can pick up on those patterns, like, by saying, like, okay, these are the problem patterns, and this guy at your firm is the problem pattern guy. And, is it guaranteed? Of course not. But
it
almost
opens up your eyes.
Yeah.
So
pay attention to that guy and what he's doing. And,
Yeah. Wow.
So it's really interesting stuff. I think there's a lot of opportunity for AI in conflicts.
Yeah.
Conflicts are very straightforward, but people shy away from them because they think there's a complicated factor. But it really is matching up names in a database, and then based on that, spitting out, okay, here's the potential conflict and here's the waiver you would use. There's really like 6 scenarios for any conflict. There's conflict that you can't waive or you can. And if you can, it's one of these 6 scenarios. And I really think there's an opportunity for an AI platform to do that. It's something I'm trying to play around with, although I'm out of my depth.
Nice. That's awesome. That's awesome that you're doing that. Yeah, look, I think that you got to embrace it because it's coming. It's already here. And for anybody that's saying, yeah, not me.
Yeah.
That's what the guy who stuck with his fax machine and didn't go to email, it was saying before, now he probably hangs out in his shag carpet office with his fax machine and nobody else. So listen, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. I think that it's a really valuable service that you provide for law firms that are small to mid-sized law firms, especially. How are people best to find you, get in contact with you?
LinkedIn is the best. And then, my email is jeff.cunningham@mgclaw.com. But LinkedIn, I'm always there. I'm always pumping out videos and content on LinkedIn. So they can just tag along there. And then for anybody listening, I review engagement agreements for free. So feel free to reach out. I'm happy to provide an educational engagement agreement review. I'm trying to get 1,000. I'm almost at 900. So I'm getting there.
Yeah, I think I was one of your first 200 people that did it because when I found you did it, I was like, you know what? Let me check this out. I signed up for your monthly program right after that. But look, I made changes to my retainer and I've been using the same retainers that were drafted back in the day by different counsel. But again, you got to change with the times, right? So like if it hasn't been reviewed in a decade, like most law firms, just have somebody review your retainer, make the changes, stay current.
Yeah, I've learned so much from doing it. Every time I review one, I learn something new. It's been incredible. But so many legal mal clients, first thing I ask for is send me the retainer agreement. And I pull it up and it's New York. And it's the old disciplinary rules that are, a decade and a half old. And I'm like, oh no, why? And the retainer's from last year, but it references the old rules. And it just means you're better off not having one.
You got to update. You got to be updating your stuff. You got to stay current. So look, it's been awesome having you on, man.
Thanks so much.
I look forward to talking to you. And I hope that anybody that's listening to this, that they kind of get caught up with the century that we're in terms of all of the stuff that I was griping about for the last hour. So
thank you so much.
Jeff, thank you guys. It was awesome. Thank you.